I bet they weren't, said Omri. After all they'd been through. Cowboys and Indians are used to rough treatment, Patrick retorted. Anyway, I left some food in my pocket for later if they want it. It'll get all squishy. Oh, so what? Don't fuss so much. They don't mind. How do you know what they mind? Said Omri hotly, forgetting to whisper. The teacher turned around. Oh, so there you are, Patrick, and where have you been, may I inquire? Sorry, Miss Hilton. I didn't ask if you were sorry, I'd asked where you'd been. Patrick coughed and lowered his voice. In the toilet, he mumbled. For nearly 20 minutes? I don't believe you. Are you telling the truth? Patrick mumbled something. Patrick, answer me or I'll send you to the headmaster. This was the ultimate threat. The headmaster was very fierce and could make you feel about 2 inches high. So Patrick said, I was in the music room, and that's true. And I forgot the time. And that's not true, added Omri silently. Miss Hilton was nobody's fool. She knew it, too. You better go and see Mr. Johnson, she said. Omri, you go, too, chattering away there as usual. Tell him I said you were both disturbing the class, and I am extremely tired of it. They got up silently and walked through the tables while all the girls giggled and boys smirked or looked sorry for them, according to whether they liked them or not. Omri glanced at Patrick under his eyebrows. They were in for it now. Outside the headmaster's office, they stopped. You knock, whispered Omri. No, you, retorted Patrick. They dithered about for a few minutes, but it was useless to put it off. So in the end, they both knocked together. Yes, came a rather irritable voice from inside. They edged around the door. Mr. Johnson was seated at his large desk, working at some papers. He looked up at once. Well, you two. What was it this time, fighting in the playground or talking in class? Talking, they said, and Patrick added, and I was late. Why? I just was. Oh, don't waste my time, snapped Mr. Johnson. There must have been a reason. I was in the music room and I forgot the time, Patrick repeated. I don't remember you being especially musical. What were you doing in the music room? Playing. Which instrument? Asked Mr. Johnson with a touch of sarcasm. Just playing. With what? He asked, raising his voice. With... He glanced at Omri, and Omri threw him a warning grimace. What are you pulling faces about, Omri? You look as if someone's just stuck a knife into you. Omri started to giggle, and that set Patrick off. Somebody just did, spluttered Patrick. Mr. Johnson was in no such jolly mood, however. He was scowling horribly. What are you talking about, you silly boy? Stop that idiotic noise. Patrick's giggles were getting worse. If they hadn't been where they were, Omri thought, Patrick would have folded up completely. Someone did stick a knife into him, hiccuped Patrick, and added, a very small one. His voice went off into a sort of whinny. Omri had stopped giggling and was staring in an awful anticipation at Patrick. When Patrick got into his state, he was apt to do and say anything, like someone who's drunk. Omri took hold of his arm and gave it a sharp shake. Shut up, he hissed. Mr. Johnson got up slowly and came around his desk. Both boys fell back a step, but Patrick didn't stop giggling. On the contrary, it got worse. He seemed to be getting completely helpless. Mr. Johnson loomed over him and took him by the shoulder. Listen here, my lad, he said in a fearsome tone. I want you to pull yourself together this moment and tell me what you meant. If there's any child in this school who so far forgets himself as to stick knives into people or even pretend to, I want to know about it. Now, who was it? Little Bear, Patrick squeaked out. Tears were running down his cheeks. Omri gasped. Don't! Who? Asked Mr. Johnson, puzzled. Patrick didn't answer. He couldn't. He was now speechless with nervous, almost hysterical laughter. Mr. Johnson gave him a shake of his own that rocked him back and forth on his feet like one of those weighted dolls that won't fall down. Then, abruptly, he let him go and strode back to his desk. You seem to be quite beyond yourself, he said sharply. I think the only thing I can do is telephone your father. Patrick stopped laughing instantly. Ah, that's better, Mr. Johnson said. Now, who did you say had stabbed Omri? Patrick stood rigid like a soldier at attention. He didn't look at Omri. He just stared straight at Mr. Johnson. I want the truth, Patrick, and I want it now. Little Bear, said Patrick very clearly and much louder than necessary. Little who? Bear. Mr. Johnson looked blank as well he might. Is that somebody's nickname or is that your idea of a joke? Patrick gave his head one stiff shake. Omri was staring at him as if paralyzed. Was he going to tell? He knew Patrick was afraid of his father. Patrick, I shall ask you once more, who is this Little Bear? Patrick opened his mouth. Omri clenched his teeth. He was helpless. Patrick said, he's an Indian. A what? Asked Mr. Johnson. His voice was very quiet now. He didn't sound annoyed anymore. An Indian. Mr. Johnson looked at him steadily for some seconds, his chin resting on his hand. You are too old to tell these sort of lies, he said quietly. It's not a lie, Patrick shouted suddenly, making both Omri and Mr. Johnson jump. It's not a lie. He is a real live American Indian. To Omri's utter horror, he saw that Patrick was beginning to cry. Mr. Johnson saw it too. He was not an unkind man. No headmaster is much good if he can't scare the wits out of children when necessary, but Mr. Johnson didn't enjoy making them cry. Now then, Patrick, none of that, he said gruffly. But Patrick misunderstood. He thought he was still saying he didn't believe him. He now said the words Omri had been dreading most. It's true, and I can prove it. And his hand went to his pocket. Omri did the only thing possible. He jumped at him and knocked him over. He sat on his chest and pinned his hands to the ground. You dare, you dare, you dare, he grinned out between clenched teeth before Mr. Johnson managed to drag him off. Get out of the room, he roared. I won't, Omri choked out. He'd be crying himself in a minute if he felt so desperate. Out! Omri felt his collar seized. He was almost hiked off his feet. The next thing he knew, he was outside the door and hearing the key turning. Without stopping to think, Omri hurled himself against the door, kicking and banging with his feet. Don't show him, Patrick! Don't show him! Patrick, don't! I'll kill you if you show him, he screamed at the top of his lungs. Footsteps came running. Through his tears and a sort of red haze, Omri saw Mrs. Hunt, the headmaster's elderly secretary, bearing down on him. He got in a couple more good kicks and shouts before she got hold of him and, with both arms around his waist, carried him, shrieking and struggling, bodily into her own little office. The minute she put him down, he tried to bolt, but she hung on. Omri, stop it, calm down. Whatever's come over you, you naughty boy. Please don't let him go in and stop him, Omri cried. Who? What? Before Omri could explain, he heard the sound of footsteps from the next room. Suddenly, Mr. Johnson appeared, holding Patrick by the elbow. The headmaster's face was dead white, and his mouth was partly open. Patrick's head was hung down, and his shoulders were heaving with sobs. One look at them told Omri the worst. Patrick had shown him.